Welcome. I'm your host, Meg Ritmanek, and today I have
Mhm.
Meghan Farner here with us. She is really digging deep into the scriptures to understand things about the divine feminine. And I'm just so excited to have her on the podcast to share the wisdom that she's gained as she's gone through this journey. But let's kind of start at the beginning, Meghan. Where, how did you come to know more about the divine feminine? What was that journey like? What was this process like for you?
Yeah, thank you, Meg. I'm so grateful to be here. I feel a little bit out of my depth, I'll be honest, just because I feel like I am a baby in the area of the divine feminine. My awakening, so to speak, was actually pretty recently. I would say that it was the beginning of 2023 that I received some really beautiful revelation, and I'll share that here in a bit. But I mean, I had grown up knowing that we have heavenly parents, and I knew that that was something that I wanted to instill in my children. And so I was pretty intentional about teaching my kids that you have a heavenly mother as well. But that was kind of the end of it. I think that there were some cultural things that I was raised with that maybe I didn't even recognize at the time, some of which I think I inherently accepted some of them, but not all of them. Like I knew hearing the tradition that Heavenly Mother is silent because she's being protected by Heavenly Father. And that never resonated with me. I was like, she's a goddess. Like, I'm pretty sure she could hold her own.
Yeah.
And so I had this interesting dynamic of like, well, maybe she's silent on purpose was the thought process that I had because I didn't believe that Heavenly Father was controlling her or hiding her in a basement or something like that. And it's been interesting because since then I've learned that silence is actually a Gnostic epithet for Heavenly Mother, which is interesting. And I think that reveals something about femininity, not that it's supposed to be silent all the time, but that it can have that essence sometimes. But through my journey, I've learned that I would better describe her as veiled. I think she definitely wants to speak to her children and be involved in our lives. And so it's been fun to unravel the false, like the unbelief that I've had, right? Unbelief meaning things that we believe that are not true,
Mhm.
and stepping into a greater place of light with her. So for more specifically my experience awakening and really starting to feel connected to Heavenly Mother, I started the Latter Day Disciples podcast at the beginning of 2022, and that was great. And it opened up a whole new world for me. I went through a spiritual rebirth, and the Lord was really guiding me and teaching me beautiful truths about the symbols of the temple and what we're supposed to be learning there. And at the beginning of 2023, I was stepping into this place of trying to set my intentions for the coming year and really wanting to experience sanctification and seeing it as kind of the next step in a spiritual progression, a spiritual path of development that we can identify in scripture and in the temple. And I was praying for that. And I was sent from my friend Jocelyn, who I think you're going to have on the podcast as well. I just love her so
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
She sent me the Easter Mary Magdalene episode that Mandy Green did with Talking Scripture. And there's a part of that episode, if you haven't heard it, I'm sure many of you have, but there's a part where she says, I'm going to share these things about the divine feminine. And many of you might think like, yeah, this, it isn't really my thing. And for others of you, it's going to light a flame in you and it's going to burn so bright. And you're going to have this desire and this appetite that you've never had before. And that was my experience. And I found that the divine feminine was the answer to my prayer for sanctification. And that basically the Lord was saying, if you want to be sanctified as a woman, you have to know your Heavenly Mother. And that was really surprising. I was expecting something like, you need to sacrifice these things. Like I was expecting kind of that answer to that prayer. And so it was shocking to me, but it was beautiful. And so I went on and I took Mandy Green's Heavenly Mother in Scripture class. I was able to connect with incredible people like Jared Rubacaba and Valerie Hudson on my podcast. I was able to invite Margaret Barker for a conference that we did. She came and spoke to us. And the next year was like a really intense just education where the Lord kept me bringing me back to this is the divine feminine. This is your mother. This is what you need to understand about femininity and masculinity. That's always so cool to me too, is that I can't learn about Heavenly Mother in a vacuum. Like I find that the Lord is always teaching me more about masculinity and about Heavenly Father, about the divine masculine side too, because it's in the contrast that we really see the partnership and the beauty of their unity. And that's what we're supposed to be working towards. So all of that was 2023. And then here at the beginning, I mean, we're 2/3 of the way through 2024, and it's just been really intense since then too. At the end of April, the Lord woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he gave me the outline for a book. And he said, I need you to write this book by July. And this was the end of April. And I was like, you mean the end of July, right? And the Lord was like, no, I mean July. And I'm like, okay. So he gave me this incredible book. I don't really feel like I wrote it. I feel like it was like channeled almost, like it just
Yeah.
was downloaded and it came through me and I typed it out. But that book is called Consider Yourself as Eve. It's a guide to spiritual development for women and the men who love them. And that has been a main means of my education in understanding the feminine and the priestesshood too. There's a whole chapter in there on priestesshood. And I didn't know any of it before I was given that task. So it's been really intense and concentrated, but that's kind of how my life has been. So it fits the pattern for me that, my experience in the last little over a year and a half has just been a deluge of the divine feminine. It's been really beautiful.
Yeah, it's like those gates just opened so wide and everything came flooding into your life. It's just, oh, I
Flooding,
great.
literally, as she does, right? When we're
Yes,
ready,
yes,
she's ready to flood in and cover us and baptize us and change us. It's
yeah.
wonderful.
In her living water that is
Yes.
unique to
Yes.
her. Oh, it's so beautiful. I've got tears. I'm like sitting here crying as you're sharing your story because it just is hitting my heart so strong and it's beautiful and exciting because I think like it's good for everyone to hear um, of women that are having these experiences and know that that experience is open for them to have as
Mhm.
well. That this is not just limited to just a few, but to all who have that
Mhm.
desire in their heart to know her more and to come to understand everything around her and all these
Mhm.
beautiful mysteries. So you kind of talked about the feminine, the divine feminine being veiled. And like talk a little more about that because I feel like that's something that we maybe don't have a real good understanding of, but that
Mhm.
is actually can be showed in the scriptures. Um, can you kind of dive into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think are really foundational to understanding this. And one of the first things is this dichotomy between masculine and feminine spirit. So, everything, all the opposites in the world, I feel like we could categorize and it would define what those things look like, right? We would understand what masculine spirit is it's like the sun. It's light, it's visible, we orient around it. It provides heat, it provides these means for us to live and grow. And it's a symbol of ascension, right? Of growing and returning back to our heavenly parents when we once we've come into this world. That's all, those are all qualities of what I would define as masculinity. So everything in our physical environment that we orient to, those are all kind of fall on the masculine side of things.
Yeah, the
And then,
tangible, like the
yes,
things that you can hold in
right,
your hand.
exactly. The masculine is the structure, right?
Right.
So the world itself and what we perceive as physical is the structure that we're in this realm. So that is all on the masculine side. And then the feminine side of that is equal and opposite and completely complementary in every single way. So the moon, as we know, could be a symbol of the divine feminine. And what do we know about the moon? Well, something that's interesting that maybe not all of us know is that some researchers have postulated that life is equally dependent upon the moon as it is on the sun. They've looked at other planets and they've noticed that in order for there to be certain necessities on the planet itself, a nearby moon is almost always a part of the equation. So, what do we know about the moon? Well, the moon controls water, right? Which is another symbol of the divine feminine. Our bodies are 70% water. So there's a heavy influence in our flesh because of the presence of the moon. It controls the tides, cycles, everything is cyclical. Cyclical. What is the word I'm saying?
I think you
Cyclical.
used the right.
Cyclical.
Yeah.
Cyclical. Cyclical is not a word and it's hard to say, so don't try me. But it has reign over these cycles, right? Of the seasons of life and death and rebirth. Um, as women, we are particularly attuned to it with our menstruation, although it affects everyone when it comes to things like sleep, which we know is so necessary for our lives, right? And for
Mhm.
orienting ourselves to gaining memory and experience in our flesh, rejuvenation, all of these things. The moon is absolutely central to all of that. So, what's interesting about the moon is that contrary to the sun we see, right? Like it defines, and by it, our lives are illuminated in so many ways. What's interesting about the moon is that we see the moon, but we see it in phases,
Mhm.
right? And we also only see one side at a time, ever, right? From the perspective of the Earth, there is a dark side of the moon that we will not see unless we were to go into space and completely change where we are. And to me, that dark side of the moon is so beautifully symbolic of the divine feminine because it's not hidden all the time, right? It's not Heavenly Mother in a basement being protected. We see her. We see her from different angles, and at different times, we're going to see different aspects of her. But there is this side of the divine feminine that we don't see, and that is the eternal mystery. It is the eternal potential. It is the creative unending ethos from which all life is derived. And so women are like that. We are veiled. I think a lot of times I'm veiled from myself. I don't know if you've had this experience, but growing up as a woman, it's kind of what am I? Like, what is going on? I don't understand. I don't have control. Like, my husband is frustrated because I can't make decisions about whatever. Like, sometimes I see in myself that there's a veil even inside of me where part of me is disclosed, and how that manifests is going to differ probably based on how much sleep and food I've had. That's a big factor in some of those things. And then there's a side of me that is a mystery to even myself. In the Hebrew tradition, that which was veiled was always that which was most precious. It was the most sacred. It was the holy of holies. It didn't have anything to do with women being less than. That's been kind of a modern interpretation that's come into that symbol over time. But that's never what God meant by it. In terms of the scriptures themselves and how they expose this, it's actually kind of fascinating. So, from a Hebrew perspective, when they're always writing on 4 levels at a time. There's the Peshat level, which is like the storytelling level. That's like what we will tell our primary kids, right? Where they go
Yeah.
and they learn about Ammon and he cut off the arms and of the guys and he saved the sheep. Like that's kind of that level. Then there's what's the next one? It's
Like archetypal.
Remez. Remez, right. So that's the first level is the Peshat level. The next level is the Remez level, and that's kind of the moral of the story, like what we're trying to learn, how we can apply that to learn good virtues and become, hopefully more Christ-like people.
Mhm.
Then there are 2 more levels, and these ones we don't often get to. The third one is called the Drash or the Midrash level, you might hear, which that's when you receive divine commentary, personal revelation that says this is what this scripture is trying to teach you right now at this time. And then the last level, the deepest level, is called the Sod level, and it is the mystery of God. So if you think about our scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, which was written by Hebrews, and the Book of Mormon, which was written by prophets who had a Hebrew upbringing and background, all of our scripture is written on 4 different levels. We're not going to find the divine feminine very often in the first 3 levels. Sometimes we do. There are beautiful shadows, there are types of women that are preserved in scripture. And we see them as mothers and queens and prophetesses and handmaids and daughters, and they teach us incredible lessons. Sometimes those stories have been distorted over time, and we had to get down into the midrash and the sod of reading scripture in order to have those things unveiled to us. And as we do, my experience has been that the divine feminine is literally everywhere in scripture. And it just takes kind of putting on the right pair of glasses, I guess, for
Yes.
us to see that. And yeah, go ahead. I've been talking too much. Go ahead.
No, no, I love that you're talking, honestly. Just keep talking, tell us more. Yeah, I do see that it is like through those glasses, right? You have to put those on and be searching
Mhm.
for that in order to get to that. It's so beautiful. Um,
Yeah.
I, yeah, is there more? Tell us more.
Well, I could get, do you want an example? Like, do we want to go into the scriptures and maybe
Yeah,
dive a
let's
little bit
just
deeper?
like do a
Okay.
little dive into scripture so people can see this, not just in theory, but in practicality.
In actuality. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me pull up. So we're going to go to our primary divine feminine shadow. We're going to go to Eve, and we're going to revisit Eve for just a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So a couple of things that's interesting, and these are concepts that are pulled from traditions that I would say resonate with more of the midrash and the sod level of scriptural interpretation. So we're in the garden, right? And we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and we have the tree of life. Now, there are some who have shared revelation and thoughts that they have, those are one and the same tree. And that the difference between them is not that they're different trees, but rather that they represent um, a certain kind of movement between spheres, right? So we have the celestial sphere where our heavenly parents are, the garden, or there's a terrestrial sphere, and then the garden is in this terrestrial sphere, and it represents a temple, a place where those of the terrestrial space can commune with God, right? Can meet them in a celestial in between kind of space.
Mhm.
And then you have the telestial sphere. So initially, Adam is created in the terrestrial sphere, and the Lord comes to him while he's alone in this sphere, and he gives him a commandment. He commands him that of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. Nevertheless, thou mayest choose for thyself, for it is given unto thee. But remember that I forbid it, for in the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Then something really interesting happens, and we get the sequence of events wrong all of the time. It goes on to say that I, the Lord God, said unto mine only begotten, it is not good for the man to be alone, wherefore I will make an helpmeet for him. So this is from the Moses 3 account that we're using. However, if you go to the Genesis account, the Moses account, and the Abraham account, all three of them coincide with each other, which, as we know about scriptures that are contained in different books, that's really rare that they all show the exact same thing, right?
Mhm.
I think that the birth of Jesus Christ was only recorded in 2 books of the New Testament out of 4.
Right.
So if there's a consistency, that's really important for us to look at. But what we're noting here is that Adam was given the commandment to not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil before Eve was even created. And there is no record of that law ever being reiterated to Eve. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Eve was never given the commandment to not partake of the tree.
Right.
We tie ourselves in knots trying to understand why Eve could be the best of us, the best woman, the wisest, and also have been beguiled in this way that she partook of the tree. And and the reality is that she was meant to partake of the tree. That
Right.
was her stewardship all along. So where do we go from there? Well, Adam is then introduced into the garden. So he was created in a terrestrial plane, and he's then moved into this celestial in between temple state. And that Eve is created. Now, there's a really interesting mystery contained in the account of Eve's creation, and I can't take credit for this. I have to give credit to my friend Meredith and also Dave Butler, who has collaborated with her to kind of see if this could really be the case. Let's see, can we pull up Genesis, the account of Eve's creation? I should have had it already here. Sorry. Okay, I found it.
Perfect.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Genesis 2:21 and 22. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and Adam slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken made he a woman and brought her unto the man. Now, usually when we read that, we assume that the he pronoun is referring to Adam and that it was Adam's rib that was taken to create woman. However, as my friend researched and as Dave was able to confirm, if you go to the original Hebrew, it's not clear that Adam is the person that's being referred to. It seems that there is at least a possibility that the rib or the side from which Eve was taken was the side of God the Father. And this is part of why it had to be done in a temple, in a celestial state, because God was there present for the creation of Eve. Adam had nothing to do with it. That's why he's asleep. He didn't just like put him to sleep so that the taking out of the rib was less uncomfortable, right?
Right.
I think Adam being asleep shows that this wasn't a part of Adam's stewardship at all. It wasn't really connected to him. The rib could also be translated the side. So from the side of God the Father was Eve created. And who sits at the side of God the Father but God the Mother?
Yeah. Makes
So
sense.
these are just some interesting things to think about. And I'm not going to say, like, I understand that this is a radically different interpretation of things than we've been handed down from the beginning of time, right? But I also would suggest that we each have a right to receive this revelation for ourselves. So if something about this is interesting, I would invite all of us to go back to the scriptures and read it again and kind of clear our mind of the things that we read into it, right? Like we have so many traditional things that we've inherited or cultural beliefs that we read into the scriptures and say, oh, they're saying this, therefore this is what they really mean because that's what we've been taught. We
Mhm.
kind of have to push all those things aside and just let God teach us and say, God, show me what you want me to see here. As a quick note, I know that some people maybe struggle with the idea of Eve's wisdom and her intuitive knowing that she was to take of the fruit of the tree. And they point to this idea of like, well, she says that she was beguiled by Satan, right? And so she must not have known what she was doing. And I would just say that there are some really interesting mysteries that we can unlock if we go and study a little bit more about the serpent
Mhm.
throughout scripture. If we look at that intertextually, and then also look at the phrase angel of light, there's some really interesting things that you can pull out of that. I won't say too much more, but I'll just say that I think that there's a way that we can preserve the fact that she was beguiled, but it was not in her partaking of the fruit that she was deceived. That was her stewardship. That was her right. That's why it's never referred to as Eve's transgression, because that was what she had been created to do, was to initiate mortality on behalf of her husband and all of us.
Mhm. Yeah. And even like her name, it's paired
Mm-hmm.
with the Savior's name. It is a Savior type like name that she's given.
Yes.
So,
That word, helpmeet, ezer kenegdo, it has connotations in the Hebrew of being an initiator, of being an adventurer, of being a risk taker, of rocking the boat, of creating, of of rejecting the status quo in a lot of ways, right? Like, and doing it for a divine purpose, which is to give life. That is the stewardship of women. And when I say give life, I mean in every possible way that you can bestow life and breath and love into the world, into humans, into our children, into our husbands and friends and family and animals and plants and every living thing. That is our stewardship. That was Eve's stewardship. That was why she needed to partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that's a really good place to kind of segue into priestesshood, which is
Yeah,
what I want you to talk about today, and kind of bring that pairing together. So I feel like you probably have a direction you can take it from there, but maybe not. Maybe I need to like
for
allude to what
sure.
I'm
No,
thinking
we
more.
can. We can. Yeah. So, let's talk about priesthood first off. So
Okay.
again, in order to define this weave, right, we have the warp and the weft, and you need both in order to create a fullness. And when it comes to priesthood, I think that this is another area where maybe we have some cultural traditions and beliefs that have infiltrated our way of thinking. And so we're going to go back to the scriptures and see what the scriptures say. And I'm going to talk in kind of broad generalities right now. I'm not going to point to too many specific scriptures, although I could recommend revisiting Doctrine and Covenants 84. Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 14 is huge. Um, there's some other places I could point to, but I'm just going to give kind of my Megan's midrash interpretation of what priesthood means in a scriptural context. Okay. So in the scriptures, when it talks about priesthood, it is always referring to an order. Think the order of the phoenix, right?
Yeah.
an order being a group of individuals that are coming together, that are collaborating for a specific purpose. In the grand scheme of things, the order of the priesthood is meant to be a gathering of priests who are coming together in a brotherhood to be trained up to become fathers, to become like God the Father. That is the ultimate potential and destiny and opportunity that's available to a man in the order of the priesthood.
Right. Like an
Okay.
apprenticeship.
Yes, an apprenticeship, a mentorship program. You could also kind of think of it, and I think of the temple this way too, like a mystery school. So there's all these different kinds of mystery schools that are established for a very specific purpose for a select number of people who are here to accomplish a certain work, right? So the priesthood is that way. It's meant to be a schooling, an apprenticeship, a mentorship program to train men up to become like God the Father. Okay. Now, the way that we typically define the priesthood in the church is that it is the power and authority of God, right? And I would say that that is the potential fruits that can be birthed by a man um, who is who enters the order of the priesthood, is sanctified in that order, and is given a greater degree, comes into the higher order, the order after the Son of God.
Mhm.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
I'm gonna say in my words of how I
yes.
have like understood it is like someone that is willing to act in the way that God would like sanction them
Yes.
acting, then is given that power to act in behalf of
Yeah.
God the Father.
Yeah. And I would say that we, for men in the order of the priesthood, there are specific events and experiences that are evidence that you are building that relationship with God that need to be experienced. And that gets into something that's going to be really related to priestesshood in a minute. So let's come back to that. But I would say that there is scripturally a qualifying event that happens before you are initiated into the priesthood. It's not um, like today, what we have is you turn 12 or you turn 18 and you go on a mission, or you have these certain life ages that you get to. And that's when we invite men to step into the order of the priesthood. In the scriptures, it's a little bit different. It comes when you've had an individual personal experience with God. So let's come back to that for a second. So remember that all of these things are symbols, right? Everything that we've been given, the temple, the church, the things that are represented there, they're all meant to symbolize something higher. And so that's really important for us as we're looking at these different things. Now, if we take priesthood, we see that it's like this, the vertical lines on
A weaving.
a weave, right?
Yeah.
What are the, I don't remember. Are these the
The
warp or the weft?
weft.
They're the weft. Yes,
No,
they're
they're
the
the
warp.
warp,
They're the
and
warp.
this is the weft
Okay,
because the weft
perfect.
goes in between.
Perfect. So the masculine is the warp. Their stewardship, their opportunity is first to come to be initiated into the priesthood, which we'll talk about is a lived experience that they have, be sanctified, develop in that their individual covenant with God, and then turn around and extend that blessing to others, to mentor in this order to help other people do the same. Okay, that's the stewardship. It's the motion of ascension, of moving downward and growing up. Okay. Now, the priestesshood is going to be the opposite, equal, complementary to the priesthood. Where the priesthood order is this hierarchical, vertical motion, that of the priestesshood is the opposite. It's horizontal, meaning that the priestesshood is disseminated. It operates on the grassroots level. Women in the priestesshood are ordained at birth
Mhm.
because it is at birth that wisdom was ordained. It was from the foundation of the world. Wisdom was ordained. We were ordained at birth. Gwendolyn Wine has some beautiful stuff about this on Square Two. If you go look up some of her articles,
Yeah.
she does a great job of talking about how women are ordained in the wombs of our mother. That is where we receive the ingrained power and authority to administer ordinances, as we'll talk about. Ordinances, the lived ordinance, as opposed to the temple ordinance, which is where our men are officiating currently. So what's interesting about that is that that means that all women are born priestesses,
Mhm.
whether in the church or out of the church. The feminine is a spirit of unity and harmony and inclusivity, and it is expansive, it's global, it's universal. All women have the opportunity to be a part of this.
Right.
Does that make sense so far?
Yes, absolutely. And I
Okay.
kind of want to refer back to, the scriptures where it
Hmm.
talks about how there is an order of the priesthood, priestesshood, or godly order that will never be taken off the earth.
Yes.
And like Gwendolyn, you said, has kind of dove into this and expanded on this. So we're going to have Gwendolyn on the podcast at some point as well, which
Yay.
we're excited about.
Yes.
But I think that there is a potential that this is that order that has never been removed, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
It's always been sustained within
Yeah.
just the womb of women.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And let's talk about that for a minute. So, have you read any Valerie Hudson's work on ordinances of the flesh?
I have read like her double P priesthood
Hmm.
book on Square Two or article on Square Two, and we're also going to have Valerie
Oh,
on the
good.
podcast at some point. So
Awesome. You have such a
yeah,
great lineup of guests.
I know I'm so
Yes.
excited.
Okay, so I'll just summarize kind of the main idea that Valerie shares, right? And other women who are thought leaders who are way more advanced than I am have done a really great job of pulling this out, and I'm just going to add a layer on top of it, okay?
Awesome.
So, what a lot of these women have discovered is that there are the ordinances that we associate with church, right? We look at baptism and the temple and the ordinances that we perform there, and they see those as kind of the masculine side of the ordinance. And then they suggest that there are ordinances of the flesh, and that is pregnancy, birth, lactation, all of these things that are part of our capacity as women to give life, right?
Mhm.
And so there's this dichotomy that we create where, well, men have they officiate over these ordinances and women officiate over these ordinances of the flesh. And I think that that's a really beautiful thought and a beautiful way to look at it. I'm going to add one layer at the expense and the potential cost of being labeled a complete and total heretic. Okay. And I'm going to suggest that these ordinances are actually one and the same, and they are two halves of one whole. And the way that that works is that what we do in the temple, as you and I were discussing briefly, everything that we do in the temple is symbolic. So during the endowment ceremony, we participate in 4 symbolic ordinances. Each of them have a sign, they have a law, and they have a token. And we can identify 4 different places in the endowment where we make a sign, where we receive a law, and we then receive a token symbolically. Okay. A lot of the time we look at that and we think, great, I've received these ordinances, I've gone through the temple, I've gone back and I've done the work again, and so we're good. And we're kind of, we have sort of a checkbox mentality to a
Yeah.
lot of what's taking place there. And what I would suggest is that those symbols are meant to teach us about actual lived experiences that we have in our lives where we participate in something physical, which we could call a sign, where we are spiritually agreeing to deepen our covenant relationship with God by agreeing to live a law, and where we receive a token, which is what I call a gift of grace, which is an actual experience with God, where we encounter Jesus Christ in our lives. So these things are the same. And the temple is meant to teach us. It's meant to teach us what these symbols are and how we can experience them in our everyday lives. And where the feminine comes in is that you cannot have the lived ordinances unless you are integrating the feminine in your life. So let's talk about the first ordinance. Okay. In a temple, Adam and Eve receive the first ordinance when they're in the garden and they're about to leave. So they're in a terrestrial temple and they're about to descend into a celestial state. And they make a sign, they receive the laws of obedience and sacrifice, and they are given a token. Those symbols, I would suggest one level of
Interpreting.
interpreting. My words are having a hard time today. I apologize. One level of interpreting those signs, I would suggest that the lived ordinance associated with that first temple ordinance is the ordinance of birth.
Yeah.
It is the point where we are transitioning from a higher realm into this realm. We agree to live the laws of obedience and sacrifice before we came here. And we see that. We see that in our infants when they're born, that they have these ingrained reflexes. They know how to suck. They know how to root around to find food. They know how to curl their toes. Um, and those are outward exhibitions of the fact that they are living the law of obedience, that they have come here prepared to obey their bodies and meet the physical needs of their bodies. And then we are trained and hopefully taught by our parents how to live spiritual laws, how to obey the first token, right? The first
Mhm.
token that we're given at birth, the first gift of grace that we receive is the light of Christ. And it is through the medium of a priestess, our mother, that all of us enter into this world and experience the first ordinance that is symbolized in the temple.
Can I share a story real
Yeah.
quick that I feel like is connected to this? I had a dear friend who um, is just a wise sage late in her life, has had some of her children leave the church, and she's always been very devout and had this experience of just struggling with that decision of her kids and feeling like, I'm not this idea that is kind of taught in our church that like no empty seats and like don't let your children be separated from you in the eternal kingdom and in the celestial kingdom and things like that. And um, she had this experience where she went to a temple um, dedication, and they told her that the doors would be locked at a certain time, but she had forgotten her scarf, so she ran out to the car, grabbed it, and she went back and the doors had been locked. And the spirit just she just felt so much pain in that moment, it felt very symbolic to her of like maybe what her children were experiencing, and she just was in so much sorrow, and she felt a spirit of comfort come to her and testify to her that like she is the mother of her children, and that she could never ever be separated from them, and that she the spirit said the ordinance of birth has been performed by you, and there is no way you can be separated from your children.
Mm.
And she told me this story in confidence, and then also I asked her if I could share it with others today because I knew we were going to be talking about this. And um, I think it's another testament of this truth that we're
Mhm.
sharing today is of this priestesshood and how it is carried forward in the world today.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and it harkens to another symbolic temple ordinance when we think about the ceiling. Um, the ceiling has so many levels of beautiful symbolism, and it's a wonderful gift to be able to experience that. At the same time, it too is symbolic, right? And we know that our ceiling is contingent upon us and being faithful individually to God and then also our spouse. There's that requirement before our sealing will be ratified, right? But what's interesting to think about is the shadow of being born in the covenant. And a lot of the times we think, well, that means that a child is born to parents who were married in the temple, and that's what that means. And I would broaden that drastically, and I would say that if you are born into the world, you are born under the terms and conditions of the new and everlasting covenant. And in that way, our children are ours in an eternal scheme. Even those who are not members of the church or who aren't sealed in the church before having children, um, you administered the gift of life, the first ordinance to your children. And because of that, you have an eternal bond with them that cannot be negated in
Yeah,
any way.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
would agree.
Yeah. So, um, we can just we can just focus on that one, but I do want to say too that the other ordinances, the lived ordinances that are symbolized in the temple, also require women. Those ones that I've identified are first birth. The second ordinance is baptism. We perform baptisms of water, which is the sign that we make when we agree to live the law of the gospel. And I think even the law of sacrifice plays into that actually really strongly. And eventually, when we learn to live that law, we receive a token from Jesus Christ directly, which is the baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost. And we don't have the ability to really go into that too deeply here, but I would just say that that is a topic worth studying. Our even our leadership have indicated that the confirmation that we receive is an invitation to go and actually receive the Holy Ghost and all of the gifts that come with that in actuality. Baptisms are witnessed by the mother, birth is witnessed by the father. So there's a reversal of roles there. But what's interesting is once you move past those two ordinances and you start getting into the third and fourth, which I suggest are the ordinance of marriage and the ordinance of sealing, which are actually two different events in our spiritual development, there is more of an integration. There's less of a, oh, the priestess is birthing and the man is witnessing, and then the man is baptizing and the woman is witnessing. When you start moving into marriage and sealing, that's when the masculine and the feminine are integrating both in ourselves, right? Because we all individually have feminine and masculine spirit. You and I are going to have more feminine spirit because we are feminine spirits, right?
Yeah.
And it's really important actually for this process of our spiritual development for us to learn how to be feminine.
Yeah. Embody
Um,
it.
yes, yes, that's a really, and the same for men. Like men in their spiritual development have to learn how to be masculine. And that's a whole other conversation because there's a lot of challenges right now where we're all kind of reversed. Like
Mhm.
couples that I know, the woman is the one who sits in the masculine energy most of the time, and the man has this feminine energy, and it creates a lot of tension. So this is a process of healing too. But I just wanted to say that marriage and sealing, those are the lived ordinances, and neither of them are happening without women. Let's be real. Like,
Mhm.
there's not a natural man in the world that would agree to only have sexual relations with one woman unless she was who she is, right? And it's not something that we earn, it's something that we are. And the right men recognize that and they commit to us. Obviously, I want to be sensitive because it's hard to talk about these things because there are so many varying experiences.
Yeah,
And I
so
want to
much
say that,
pain that
and so
some
much
are
pain, but I
experiencing.
want to say that that's okay. And that's the feminine side too. Like the masculine side is the side that says, this is the way it has to be. It's black and white, you're in or out. Like, and there's value to that to a degree. But if it's unbalanced with the feminine side, which is that, no, there's nuance and there's a gray area. And it's not really gray to our heavenly parents. It's 10,000 colors that they can see. And we just haven't learned to see it yet.
Yeah.
And so as we're moving through this process, as we're integrating, balancing in ourselves, aligning with our spouse, aligning to God, they show us how it's okay if we're not fitting the exact mold that that the ideal that's kind of presented.
Mhm.
And there's room for that. There's room for each of us to have our own experience, and that room is held by our Heavenly Mother. Like she
Mhm.
is the womb space that exists for us to learn and grow in exactly the way that we individually need to.
Mhm. Yeah, to develop. I do want to kind of go back for just a second, and because you brought up baptism, and I think something that we don't talk about a lot is how divinely feminine the symbol of baptism is, and
Yeah.
how Jesus Christ even talked about, like being reborn and oh my goodness, his Nicodemus,
Yes.
asks like, "So you want me to enter back into the womb of my mother?" Right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
so confused by what you're saying. And there's obviously teachings there that connect that to the mother
Yeah.
and being born again is
Yeah.
is something that is divinely feminine. So,
Yes. It's so true. Death, life, and rebirth. They're
mhm,
all the feminine and we're hopefully going through those cycles multiple times throughout our life, right? Where we're experiencing spiritual deaths of kinds where we're faced with parts of us that are no longer serving us, parts of us that are traumatized and that need to be healed,
mhm,
right? And that as we rely on the Lord, He can do that work, and He is um, the perfect shadow of both His Father and His Mother. Yes, baptism is so incredible. So again, when we talk about ordinances, the temple teaches us that there are multiple parts to each ordinance. There's the sign, which is like the physical ceremony. There's a law, which is again agreeing that you want to progress in this covenant relationship and that you're willing to take on more responsibility to do that. Um, and to grow to know God for ourselves. And then there's the token, which is the gift of grace. In the temple right now, those are portrayed only in the video. It used to be that you would individually, a worker would come up and would give you the token. And I actually think there was a lot of value and beauty in that because we understood maybe a little bit better, like, oh, there is something, this is symbolizing something physical that happens to me that I
mhm,
get individually. So the ordinance of baptism, the sign that we make is the baptism of water, and it is so beautifully feminine, as you said. We go into these waters, the primordial waters, the waters of life, the waters of the womb, water being so divinely feminine in so many ways,
mhm,
and we die. We die a symbolic death where we go under the water completely immersed in a moment, and then we are brought again up into new life. And so you see this cycle of creation, fall, and atonement.
mhm,
That is the invitation our parents have for us to define our life by that cycle. Now, that is just one part of the ordinance. It's half. When we make that sign, we are witnessing to God. I want to have this deeper relationship with you. God being our heavenly parents, right?
Mhm.
Both of them. I want this with you. And I'm willing to take upon myself your name and to learn how to suffer with others and to administer the way that you want me to. I'm willing to do that. That's one half. That's, well, two-thirds, if you want to say. That's the sign and the law that we're agreeing to. But we haven't yet received the token. The symbol of baptism of water shows us how we need to live in order to go forward and receive the token. That we need to live the law of sacrifice. That is, I will learn to use the light of Christ, that gift I've already been given through my mother. I will learn how to abide and obey that. I will do whatever it takes. I will sacrifice whatever is asked of me. And I inevitably, if I'm doing that intentionally, I will inevitably be led to a point where I am completely broken and where my heart is rent. And that is what the Lord needs. That's what He needs from me. Because once I've reached that point, now I have fertile soil in my heart. Now I have made space. There's been a womb space opened up in me where He can come and plant a seed. And He can visit me with the Holy Ghost, and it will take root in me. And then we get into the really fun stuff. And then it's all uphill from there, honestly. But I think that I think that that experience where we see it in scripture, we see the feminine in that too. So for
Mhm.
example, we were just reading in the early chapters of Helaman chapters 5 and 6. And this is the account of Nephi and Lehi, and they're in the jail and they're in prison. They're surrounded by these Lamanites, and um, they they are losing hope in a lot of ways. And a voice comes, and it's described as a mild voice, but it is powerful. And reading through this just recently, I felt impressed that who's to not say that it was a feminine voice?
Mhm.
And the voice witnesses of her only begotten. And the people, the Lamanites, are surrounded by darkness. And I think that's really interesting. They have these mists of darkness, and it elicits fear in them. But what's interesting is that the mist of darkness and darkness itself is also feminine as compared to the masculine, which is light, right?
Mhm.
And so it's almost like they were invited into this womb space. And at first they freaked out and they're like, what do we do with this? Like, and it does. Like, Heavenly Mother, she's no joke. Like, she makes us face our fears
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
see the points in us that are wounded and that are fearful and that are, she makes us face our darkness.
Yeah, and if anyone listening to this right now wants to go back, we've done a few podcasts specifically talking about this path of descent into
Yes.
kind of shadow work that is divinely feminine in
Yeah.
nature. Um, we use the parable of Anana and
Hmm.
kind of break that apart and talk about her descent into the underworld and how this is a pattern that we need to learn how to embody,
Yeah.
and also just doing shadow work. So I'll put links to those in our podcast so
Yes.
that people can go back and learn
Beautiful.
about that pattern because it's essential for our progress,
Yes.
right?
So, so essential. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Yeah. And so it's like the Lamanites were collectively invited into this place where they could do some shadow work and say, am I on the path that I want to be on? And I'm really freaked out right now. Those guys are surrounded by flames talking to angels. That looks better than the experience I'm having right now, right? And so there's a moment of self-evaluation, and one of them is formerly a Nephite, and he says, and they ask him, well, what do we do? How do we get through this? And they say, you need to call out to Jesus until you have faith in Jesus Christ, and He will be the one to deliver you. And I think a lot of the times we read that as like, oh, they prayed really hard. But you have to realize that in that moment, their hearts were broken. Like they were done. They all collectively got to this point of like, this is not the life I want anymore. And I'm willing to put myself on the altar and allow Jesus Christ to kill my natural self so that I can be reborn and so
Right.
that I can be so that I can transcend. And they hear the voice 3 more times, this beautiful voice just saying, repent. And we know that Jesus Christ, so many times when he said repent and be converted, be changed. Let me give you the Holy Ghost so that I can heal you. And that's what they did. And then they were encircled about by flames. I think this experience is a lot more literal and a lot more available
Mhm.
than we think. In fact, I would testify from my personal experience that it is. And it is essential. And it is an invitation to our mother as well
Absolutely.
as to our Father. It is the way that we receive the Holy Ghost, which that itself is, there's a lot of feminine in that role too.
Right. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, I think about um, AA, that organization. They talk about how change cannot happen without some kind of spiritual interaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to say like that is not available to everyone is definitely not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It is, and it is what changes people. It's having
Absolutely.
that experience. So yeah,
It's
it's
the
having
grace.
yeah.
It is the atonement. It is the atonement is a gift we receive. And if you don't know if you've received that gift, go ask for it because our heavenly parents need us. They need men and women who have been transformed by Jesus Christ to do this work. It is how we both progress. In fact, this is the qualifying event in the scriptures for men who are initiated in the priesthood, is that they first had this actual encounter with God. And so if you haven't had it yet, that's okay. That's great. That's so good to know. Go to the Lord and start asking how to receive it.
Yeah. And it's a personal journey, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people let their doubt stop them from taking that step of asking, like, how can I have this? How can
Yeah.
I have this experience? And do I have to go to like the lowest point in my life to be able to have that experience? No, no, that is not required.
I I didn't. Um I know a lot of people that do.
Mhm.
I think again, it's the opening of your heart. It's opening up that space and saying, I will do whatever. Like I will put whatever on the and I will witness that. Like you start telling me things to do and I'll start doing them. And then when you're ready, I know that you'll come to me in your perfect timing and you'll be the one, Jesus Christ will be the one to come and change my heart and change me into a new person. It was my experience that I wasn't at a low point. I just hadn't learned enough. And I had unbelief. I had a false belief that that experience was um, dramatic, unusual, and only available to a select few. And that's kind of a tradition that we've been taught is that those miraculous experiences are only for the special few, and we just have to learn lessons from their experiences. That is a false belief. And I had to be rid of that. And once I was rid of that, he was so eager to come and and allow me to experience him.
That's so beautiful. I love what we're covering, but I know that I have so many more questions
I
about
know. It's okay. We can
priestesshood.
transition. Well, and I go over these things very in depth in my book. So if anyone's interested, they can look to that and hopefully it'll fill in a lot of the gaps to these other things that we're talking about.
Yes, yes, I am so excited for that to come out. When does it come out exactly? And how do we
So
find it?
yes. So I'll provide a link if your listeners want to sign up. This is just to receive notifications about the book, but it should be available in mid-October for pre-order, and then it will be coming out in November. So we're getting close. It's really exciting.
It's so
Um,
exciting.
the publisher is Plain and Precious Publishing. So the Stick of Joseph Boys, Dave Butler, he's done amazing work about Heavenly Mother and revealing her. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to be working with them.
Yeah, they are doing an incredible job, I feel like, over there.
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for the work they've been doing. It just makes me I the first time they did an episode about the divine feminine, I was like freaking out. I
I
was so
know.
excited
I
because
know.
I'm just
Well, it's
like,
so refreshing to see men doing it. Like,
it
I mean,
is.
the work we're doing is so important and the work you're doing is incredible. But to see men do it, it's like a whole other level
It
of like,
is.
yes, you're getting it. And honestly, I think that that's going to be a big test. In the coming days, the feminine is here. It's here to stay and it's here to integrate. We don't want to, at least the way that I see it, is this isn't about displacing men or putting men under women or in any way creating an inequality. It's about integration. And that's going to be really challenging for a lot of people. And so it gives me hope, especially when I see men who want to go there, who want to integrate more fully with their wives and their children, their daughters and their sisters and their mothers. And there are really wonderful men that want to do that. And so it's really beautiful to see.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Ugh, it is. And really, what is more enriching in your life than having a relationship like that with your significant other, with your husband or wife, that is so meaningful and
Yeah.
beautiful and connected, right?
Yeah.
And even as you've talked about some of these signs, tokens, and things, I just think about like, what are some physical signs that I've like entered into
Yes.
with my husband, right? I
Yes.
don't know if I have to speak that out like
I would
really
call that a
clearly.
sacrament. I would call that a sacrament. And that is a part of the ordinance. Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
don't have to get more explicit than that. But that's something I do talk about too, is that actually is a sacrament being something that you partake of and embody in order to turn around and bless someone else. And it teaches you how to live the law while you're working towards receiving that token.
It's so beautiful to bring that like spirituality into it.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I'm excited for more women to be taught by the Spirit on these types of things, and also for just these amazing thought leaders. So I think I consider you as one of them,
Oh, thank
kind
you.
of blazing the way and the path and helping us to expand the vision of what this is and come to a more clear understanding of what priestesshood is.
Mm,
Uh, let's see. Some of these questions that I had. How is it that women have been ordained in the priesthood? Does one officiate in the divine feminine
mm,
priestesshood? What are some of the ordinances and what does it require to, like, what is the difference between like doing them versus
mm.
receiving them? So
Yeah.
lots of questions. How would you like to move forward with
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe answering some of
I
those?
think we've hit on some of it, but I think it's good to review. So, in terms of our officiating, again, we've been ordained. So we have been given the invitation. I think what comes next is our accepting it and saying, yes, this is who I'm meant to be. I do have authority. I have power. I have been asked by my heavenly parents to do this work. And so I'm going to do it. Um, it has a lot to do again with our stewardship, and that stewardship being to give life. So, how many ways can you possibly give life, give joy, give growth? And inspiration to other people. There are so many ways. And each woman, we each have our own individual ministry that I honestly believe if we go to the Lord and ask Him, what do you want me to be focused on? What is my ministry? He will illuminate that. And we have already been given the power and the keys. We can talk about that a little bit, to perform whatever our ministry is. So for me, and I think for all women, we're serving in multiple callings at once all the time, our whole life
Mhm.
long, actually. And there are some women that, are born into multiple callings at once, even from birth. And so, but for me personally, right now, I am officiating as a wife, and that's hard work. That it's a
Yeah.
lot of work to give life to our husbands. I think that in a lot of ways, and we see this in scripture, we see this in other patterns. Women are the ones who birth our husbands, to help them get into that order of the priesthood, right? To learn how to put off the natural man and offer their own sacrifice of a broken heart and contrite spirit so that they can receive that full ordinance and then be initiated into the priesthood. That doesn't happen very often without a good woman that's
Mhm.
there encouraging you, balancing with you, learning how to stand in our femininity so that we're acting from a place that's inspiring and not like nagging, because that's something that I fell into a lot during early marriage. I didn't think that I was naggy, but I'm sure that was the spirit that I had. Was like, you need to be doing this and you're not doing this. And I was so concerned and I was controlling without even meaning to be. Um, and God has taught me, like, no, you can assert a lot of influence and power, but not by stepping into the masculine. The assertive, directive, um, that kind of energy is more masculine than feminine. And so I've had to learn, how do I step into my feminine, which is every bit as powerful, and love you into a place where you're willing to change and grow. And that is way harder
Well, I'll
in my
just
experience. Yeah.
yeah, I'll just
Mhm.
say, like, I have experienced both of these,
Mhm.
ex opposites in my
Spirits,
life.
energies. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Of, like, at chur maybe experiencing it at church, like, the checklist of, like, I need to check off these things, to be able to be fully in tune with God. And
Mhm.
then also having this experience of the divine coming into my life and overpowering me with so much love that that changes my heart. And that
Mm,
that
yes.
was the more powerful force in my life for goodness, was that love, that overwhelming love that just inspired me to be better rather
Yes.
than the like check off all these lists and be good,
Yes.
like, you
And
know.
this is the movement from the masculine into integrating with the feminine, right?
Yeah.
Because the masculine is kind of that ironic, like lower preparatory checkbox, right? And you don't want to throw that out. Like it teaches you how to form good habits and hopefully
Mhm.
inspires you to have a relationship with God. But there comes a point in time where Jesus is teaching us the Sermon on the Mount and saying there's a higher law. And in this higher law is the feminine. And that says more powerful than fear and just being told what to do is love
Right.
and learning how to do things because I'm motivated by love. And so I've had to learn to do that with my husband. And that's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, and even with our kids, right? It's like you can tell your
Yes.
kids like, okay, you need to do this and do this and do this, and maybe even like using shame sometimes to motivate
Yeah.
them to behave in a certain way, whereas like the higher law would be to like inspire them to
Yes.
behave in a better way by saying like, I know that this behavior that you're doing right now isn't in alignment with who you truly are,
Yeah.
and I see you as compassionate, I see you as kind, I see you as
Hmm.
honest, like I know that those things are truly who you are, and I want you to act
Yeah.
uh, into the like the fullness of who you are as a
Hmm.
child of God. And
Right.
so
And that's
there
so
are
hard too, because it's like they're kids, right? Like they're not really they don't really come knowing how to live the law of obedience, right? And so
right.
there's also this like, well, I have got to teach you how to hear wisdom and respond to it, right? And so, oh, it's so hard. And I've been feeling that lately. I'm like, man, as a mom. Well, and the other aspect of it too is that women, we have this really beautiful role as an intercessor between our husbands and our children. So, like, compared to our husband, we are in the position to embrace our femininity and learn how to influence and grow and birth them through that. But relative to our children, we're more on the masculine side than our children are, because our children have no idea, like they're completely dependent, right? They have no context for how to live life and how to have structure of any kind. And
Mhm.
so moms are in the position where we have to kind of provide some of that for it. And so we're constantly doing this like seesaw thing where I'm more like I'm feminine with my husband, I'm more masculine compared to my children, and I'm learning how to balance that. But I would say that the role of an intercessor is divinely feminine. And that's really what we are designed to be. I have a friend who reached out to me through the podcast, and he was talking about the spirit of Elijah and how he sees the unity of masculine and feminine really playing into having the spirit of Elijah. And I went and I was reading those scriptures, and it's so beautiful because it talks about how, the spirit of Elijah is this turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children of the fathers. And how do you do that? you do that with the mother. The mother is the one who plays that intercessory role between the fathers and the children. So there's another example of like a mystery that's there in scripture if we have eyes to see.
It's so beautiful. So beautiful.
So did I answer all your questions? So officiating, I mean, we have that, I think learning again how to stand in our femininity and influence from a place of love and unconditional love is so powerful and important. In terms of administering ordinances, I mean, I think we've talked about all of the ordinances are have a feminine aspect, and the more that we receive, the more integrated that feminine and masculine are. And so without women, if you take that out, and we can kind of see this because I would say that compared to the number of symbolic temple ordinances we perform, there are very few that are receiving the full lived ordinance. And I think that you could say that part of that is because we haven't reintegrated the feminine as strongly as we could. We don't understand that it's not just the symbol we need to be participating in, we need to be living it, and we need to be having these encounters with God. And so that's kind of sad, and we could talk about that a little bit more too, but it's going to be it's we already see it. We're here to correct it, right? Like you and I are here to fill in that puzzle piece, and it'll all come together, and then we'll start to see those lived ordinances being completed and people having more and more miraculous experiences with God. We're going to see that, I think, exponentially increase.
Yeah. I hope that, like, if anything, this conversation has just piqued people's curiosity and desire to just start searching out and to come to understand these things more fully. Because even as we're talking, I feel like it's still a little bit coded and not
Yeah,
like it doesn't feel like we're talking about the structure of the priesthood.
right.
It's so different.
Yeah, it's a
But
whole other level.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. If I totally get why you feel that way, and if anyone else does, like just know that that's totally okay. And just start wherever the spirit inspires you to start. Like don't feel like you have to understand. Like all of this is like a really intense culmination of me being trained up for my ministry. And so it's okay. Like, don't try to eat the whole elephant. I would just say, ask the spirit, like, where would you like me to focus? Because there is so much to learn. One thing that I would say, just to kind of back up this idea about symbolic temple ordinances and lived ordinances, is that if you go to the scriptures, sometimes people would make the contention of like, well, we don't see temple ordinances in the scriptures, right? And it's true, we don't see the symbolic temple ordinance. We don't see the signs and the laws and the tokens the way that we receive them in the temple. Instead, what you see in the scripture is the lived ordinance. So, one thing that you might do is go back to the scriptures and revisit, where do we see birth? Where do I see baptism? Where do I see marriage? And where do I see the sealing of people being sealed to Jesus Christ and seeing him, experiencing him, being sealed to him, and receiving sealing power themselves? So that might be one way that we can see, oh, like the scriptures testify of this. And we can start there to understand, what does it look like for me to experience those things?
Mhm. That's beautiful. How how do we address kind of the issue of like those women that don't have it in the cards of this life to give birth or
Hmm.
to be married?
Yes.
How do they still participate in
Yes.
the order of the priestesshood?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. This is such an important question, and I want everyone to hear this loud and clear. Um, First off, I believe that there's probably a lot more variety in why we came here as individuals and what we were hoping to experience and get out of this life. And I say that to release sometimes this energy of judgment that we have towards ourselves or others, where we feel like I have to experience X, Y, and Z. And if I don't, then my life is not useful or right or, correct in some way. I think that, again, Heavenly Mother holds so much space for each of us to have the experience that we wanted to have and needed to have. without any judgment. So I just want to put that out there first and foremost. The thing about these ordinances, and again, I'm so glad that you brought this up, is that even if um, let's say I don't have a partner who is making this journey with me, that either I'm not married or I am divorced, I'm widowed, or maybe I'm married to someone who is not as interested as I am in integrating, right? Either with themselves, they're not really interested in adopting their own masculine spirit and growing in the Lord and kind of moving through this development, or with me, maybe there's a disconnect between us spiritually and they're not really interested in buying into that. Um, I testify and I know that our heavenly parents are 100% aware of your situation and they will work with you to help you develop spiritually regardless of that part, regardless of whether or not your spouse is going with you. And I would say the same thing for having children. The thing about giving life, again, is that we give life in 10,000 ways.
Mhm.
And yes, having children is like a really obvious example of that. And I think it's something that women desire. And it's heartbreaking when we don't have that opportunity or that ability. But I would testify that you can still, and you do still, by nature of who you are as a woman, you give life in so many ways. And God knows that. And so they will work with you to customize this process. It might be that maybe we experience things in a different order or it looks different than other people. But if we rely and are focused on developing this relationship with God through Jesus Christ, they will put everything in our path that we need. They will
Mhm.
make sure that we have the sanctifying experiences that we need. They will teach us how to become balanced. And I firmly believe that each of us will have the opportunity to partner with someone who wants to go to the same place that we want to, even if maybe that person isn't the person we're married to right now. I say that really carefully because I would never suggest unless you feel guided by the Spirit, because I won't say that God never tells us not to, you know, I won't say that God would never tell you to leave your partner because I don't think that that's true. But I think that more often than not, um, even if I'm not with someone right now who wants to develop the same way I want to and who wants to, really invest in this with me, God knows that, and I can be sanctified in my relationship with my husband, and the Lord knows how to turn our hearts to each other. And in loving and growing and sanctifying with Him, eventually it will all work out. And like, even if our ceiling isn't something that we actually experience, again, that ratification where Jesus Christ is the one that says you two have both progressed and you are sealed, that's okay. And like we will have the opportunity to have that at some point in the future. I know
Yeah.
that's really ambiguous and unspecific.
I just like when you come to that point, I just feel like life is so expansive beyond the point
Mhm.
of even death. It is eternal. And so,
Yes.
like, uh, our experiences in this moment, I think, are given to us to let us have those descents so that we
Yes.
can, clear the ground and plant the seeds that need to be
Yes.
planted. And then also, I think an important question to ask ourselves as women is what and collaborate with God on this
Mhm.
specifically, not just do it independently, but a collaboration with them is the essential part. Is ask them, what is it you want me to birth into this world to give life?
Mhm.
Like it it could be so many different things,
Mhm.
and I guarantee you, if you ask that question and you move forward, that you will bless so many people
Yeah.
by moving forward with that ministry.
Yes,
So,
thank you. And into our marriage too. I am married to my high school sweetheart. We're best friends. I love him so much. We're also really not on the same page spiritually. And that's okay. That's
we have
so
a very
okay.
similar
Yes.
story. High school
And like,
sweetheart, same and
yeah,
same
really?
thing. Yeah.
That's crazy. I always say that like there are pros and cons to it because everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cute and romantic." And I'm like, "Yes, but also you know what your spouse was like in high school." kind of messy sometimes. But like, I mean, again, I love my husband so much. He's so supportive of me. And again, we're totally best friends. And learning how to work through our differences and to love him unconditionally, even though he doesn't want to be where I'm at right now, it has changed me so much, and it has been the best thing, and it's not been easy. Like, there were definitely times that I'm like, "Should is this worth continuing in this?"
I kind of want
Um
to bring up like this point also in the tradition of Kundalini. They talk
Mhm,
about women going into a spiritual maturation within the years of childbearing, and
mhm.
how that is a lot ahead of
Yes.
the time that men go into their spiritual
Yes.
maturation. So if you
Mhm,
are experiencing, which I see this trend all over the place,
mhm.
women waking up to this spiritual awakening and then looking around and being like, why I
I
can't,
know.
what is going on? Like, why don't you see this the way I see
Yes.
it? Like, don't lose hope. Life is short, even though it feels
Mhm.
long. And that time that those men will come into that spiritual maturation is cultivated for them at a certain time
Yep.
for certain reasons, and it's probably tied to that allegory of Eve taking of
Yes.
the fruit first and Adam
Mhm.
coming to it later. And
Yes.
I think there's a lot of beautiful symbolism that we can turn to and see
Yeah. Yeah.
as we experience that. So
There's, an eternal principle of ladies first.
yeah.
And I know that's kind of funny because we might hear that and feel a little bit jaded or uncomfortable because it's come to mean certain things culturally that maybe we disagree with or disapprove of. But in reality, and kind of one of the things that I really try to draw out in this book is that women who are willing to engage with this process of spiritual development will be the ones to help our men get there. And so that's really important. And again, that's not hard and fast. I would say that it's not ever not the case that the man is the one that's there and his wife is not the one on board. I've seen that too. But I really believe that if we can lean into this and have the patience and the grace and the forgiveness to work with our husbands who aren't there yet,
Mhm.
that will always pay off.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't pay off in the way that we think. But I guarantee that the sanctification that we will get from abiding with our husbands through that hard time will be worth everything. And I don't
Yeah.
think that we will regret that.
And it can look so different for different people. Like maybe a woman's awakening sets her on a path of descent that looks really
Yeah.
scary
Yeah.
and ugly and unknown and
Mhm.
full of sadness and remorse and I don't know
Yeah.
whatever else. Like it could look really really scary to some men to watch a
Mhm.
woman go through the path of descent and
Yeah.
be like, what is going on with my wife? I've seen that. And
Yeah.
maybe they feel like, oh, I am on the sure and true path. Like I am staying, I am staying faithful, but and
Yeah.
she's not. But like I think that sometimes that's actually what will sanctify her.
Yeah, it is. And that's
And
that's a whole other conversation we could have. I have a podcast coming out soon about the stages of faith with Steve Reed.
oh, that
And I
sounds
would encourage
amazing.
people to go listen to that because
Yeah.
stage 4, to a stage 3 person looks like you're apostate and you've lost your mind and I don't know what to do with you. You're crazy. When
Hmm.
in reality, stage 4 is further along than stage 3.
Yeah.
And so that dark night of the soul and that death, that doesn't have to be bad. I think that there are good and bad ways that we can approach it and engage with it. But yeah, it doesn't mean that we've slid backwards necessarily. It's an essential part of the process.
Um, Okay, to wrap this up, which is kind of a big question, and maybe we don't really have time to address this.
No,
Do
you're
you
good.
have another like few minutes to kind of talk about
Yeah,
a couple more things that I think are amazing?
for sure.
Um, how is this concept of like women being a tower, which we've kind of talked about on our podcast about Mary Magdalene, being the Magdala or the tower. And we've also told the story of Josephine Asenath and how she was a tower to all nations. So these very symbolic things that are tied to women being towers. How can you kind of talk about that, how that ties to us as women today?
For sure.
And um, maybe even using those ideas from those stories.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So again, we need to look at it from the perspective of masculine and feminine spirit. Okay. And in the scriptures, I think one of the places that we can really start to understand the value and the power of the tower is in the principle of a watchman on a tower. Okay. So the watchman is the masculine side, and that's the side that gets the limelight most of the time, right? That's the one that we see, it's visible, it's a little bit more tangible, less ethereal, and so we can relate to it a little bit better. The idea of a watchman scripturally is a man who has initiated in the priesthood, has grown in that covenant relationship with God and been sanctified, and is put in a position um, to help others do the same, and specifically to help them do the same by being able to perceive threats and the efforts of the adversary, and maybe the wolves in sheep's clothing or the false doctrines, the things that we don't automatically say, oh, that's bad. They have ascended spiritually to a degree where they can discern that, and then they're the voice of warning, right? That's the idea of the watchman. So what is the tower? Well, the tower is the feminine counterpart to the watchman. And if you think about a tower, think about the symbolism of a tower. A tower is strength. It's solid. It's cement and rock. It's powerful. It is a symbol of fortitude. It's a symbol of protection. This is what makes the idea of Heavenly Mother being protected so funny, is that like she's actually the protector in a lot of ways. Like she enables the protection of her husband and all of her children.
Mhm.
I really like the idea of um, Egyptian goddess lioness Sekhmet, right? And she guards the gate to the temple, and she's a lioness. And if you are not prepared, like if you have initiated but you haven't grown in that opportunity, like she will eat you alive.
Mhm.
And so the tower has all of this symbolism of providing fortitude and protection. The tower is established, which is one of the meanings of the words ordained, right? So women are ordained. We have been established to be the means to help uplift the man. Okay. So you take out the tower, the watchman, no matter how individually wonderful and qualified he is as an individual, has a limited capacity. He can't see
He
the
doesn't
broader
have that
perspective.
gift of sight to be able to see
Exactly, the
the
gift of sight.
expanse. Yes.
And
Which
also
is
the
also
gift,
something that's tied to the divine
yes,
feminine, right?
it does. It does. Well, and I would say the gift of voice too. If I'm speaking from a tower, more people are going to hear me than if I'm down on the ground. And we actually see this a lot in King Benjamin. He is a beautiful type of a watchman on a tower. And he literally stands on a tower, orients the people towards the temple. Those are incredibly feminine symbols. He's orienting the people to the mother using the feminine, which I would say the tower specifically would align with the archetype of a wife or a queen wife. She's the one that's uplifting her husband, helping him have the perspective so that they jointly can provide for the protection of their family. Okay. One of the things that I love about the tower, and that I strongly hope myself and our sisters can understand, is that the where the value of the watchman is really dependent on his performance, the value of the tower is inherent. It's there, that it exists. The tower doesn't have to do anything to prove that it's worthy. It doesn't have to do anything other than be, in order to be worth everything, in order to make the difference for everyone. The power of women is in the power of being. It's the fact that we exist. The power of the masculine is the power of doing. And if you're like me, I was raised to think that that's the only thing that matters, is what I do. and I have to do enough in order to be worthy. There is some aspect of truth on that on the masculine side, but we're not men, we're women. And our value is in the fact that we are. And we have to learn to embrace that. It's so hard because all the voices have told us you need to be more masculine. You
Right.
need you need to do things in order to be worthy, and it's just not true.
Right, and it actually rings true to those traditions that actually have more of a feminine base where they say like your worth is in just being, right? Or
Mhm.
in my own personal experience with the divine feminine with my heavenly mother has been her saying like I just love you as you are. Just like
Yeah.
you are whole and complete and perfect just by
Mhm.
being, just by existing, just by like letting me watch you progress through life. It's such a joyful experience. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
The feminine is focused on the God within, that we are gods and goddesses, that we are cut from the same cloth as God. And the masculine is equally important. It's focused on the God without, that says, I need Jesus Christ. I need my heavenly parents. Like I have a degree of wholeness with two things. If we can do that, self-worth won't be an issue because we'll know that I am a goddess myself and I have gods and goddesses that are on my side. What else do I need?
And it's the combination of those two ideas that brings the total wholeness, right? It's
Yeah.
like
The
I am,
duality.
yes, I am complete
Mhm.
and whole inside of myself, but also I can't truly find my complete and wholeness
Yeah.
without this support from my divine team.
Yeah. And I would say that that is actually a true reflection of our heavenly family, our heavenly parents, and Jesus Christ. I think that God is much more interdependent than we know. And like, yes, they each are whole and complete, and they're also progressing and they require each other. And so when we can adopt that mentality ourselves, that gets us closer to being like them. That makes us more close to their image and to her image. So, this principle of the watchman on the tower, I think, is so important. And it relates to the idea of being clean from the blood and sins of this generation. So, in the temple, men are told that they can become clean. They have to go through this process, though. They have to be initiated in the priesthood and grow and become a watchman and perform their stewardship to qualify to be clean from the blood and sins of this generation. What does it say for the women? You are clean. You are pronounced clean from the blood and sins of this generation because we qualify by the fact that we are.
Like, how have we not picked up on that? I mean, that's
I
so
don't know.
significant and huge, right? It's just,
Hmm.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So many beautiful things to that you've given us to ponder on and to think about and to take to our sacred places and to discover more about. So thank you, Megan, so much for coming on. Do you have anything else that you'd like to end with, or just say, like, well, we like to end our podcast really with a question, and you can address this question, or if you have something else you'd like to say. How has your relationship with Heavenly Mother changed you?
I think that my relationship with my Heavenly Mother has taught me why I'm here in so many ways. Like I always had this innate sense that I was here for a reason. Like I came out of the womb running. I think like I was so eager to get here to do something, right? I had no idea what. But I knew that I was here on purpose. And I think that, especially over the last year and a half, that's just been this intense training and learning about her. God has been able to finally show me this is why you're here. You're here to help reestablish half of eternity that's been missing,
Yeah.
that's been missing from our individual lives and our spiritual growth and our understanding of the gospel and the church and the world. and we have to have her. Like, this is not extraneous. Like, it's not trivial.
Yeah.
Um, it's foundational, and uh, finally knowing her has helped me see that I'm her daughter, I'm her priestess, and I'm here to become a prophetess so that I can help other help other of my brothers and sisters remember her as well.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you for joining us today. And Megan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your time, and I hope to have you on again in the future to just discuss more beautiful, amazing things and to hasten this restoration of Heavenly Mother. I feel very much on that team as well, and I'm excited for the work that you're doing and the inspiration that you've been receiving. It's very beautiful and inspiring, and I hope it's inspired other people to know that they can do the same. So, with that said, I think we've covered a lot today, and I would love to cover more, but we've kind of gone for a long time. So,
Yes.
we'll leave it to another time. So,
It's
thank you,
been
Megan.
great. Meg, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you for you. Like, you just have a beautiful light, and you're here for this. And so many of the people listening, I just know that you're here for this too. So we're all a part of this grand design.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to take every voice until it turns into a wave that just crashes down and it covers a tsunami, just is able to break down all of the things that have been built that
Yes.
aren't supposed to be there, you know.
A new flood, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
say that they covered the world in water before, and this is a type of that.